I turned off the main road onto a narrow, snow-covered path. The car tires crunched over the fresh layer of snow, and outside the window dark shapes of the forest flickered past, powdered with white. Ahead of me, through the thickening twilight, the soft warm glow of my grandmother's house already appeared. It stood there like a beacon calling me home. A smile slowly spread across my face. I had waited for this for so long. Every year, our entire family gathered at Grandma's house for Christmas. Everyone came. My parents, my younger sister, my aunt and uncle, and my cousins with their families. For many years, this tradition had remained unbreakable. We dropped work, put aside our concerns, and came together to celebrate. I always waited for this day with impatience. Grandma's house in the countryside was never just a place. It felt like an entire world. It stood close to the forest, somewhat on the outskirts, and in the yard grew a huge spruce tree that was always decorated for the holidays. Last year, Grandma passed away, but we continued to honor the tradition and decided to gather again this year, exactly as before. I thought about how much I had missed my sister, Annie. She had always run around the house like a whirlwind, laughing or chattering non-stop. Just yesterday it felt like we were building blanket forts on the floor, and now she was an adult, working all the time, barely able to make it to these family gatherings. Of course, I missed Grandpa too. Every year he would take out the chessboard, place it by the window, and challenge me to a game. "This time, I'll beat you for sure," I always said, even though both of us knew it wasn't true. But it was never about winning. It was about the way we sat together while the wind howled outside. Anthony and Steve, my cousins, were there every year as well. Two brothers who looked so alike they could have been twins. I remembered how we used to run barefoot through the village with fishing rods slung over our shoulders. Now they had families of their own, and I was still the single one. But it didn't bother me. We would all see each other tonight, talk, and remember childhood. Thinking about this, I couldn't help smiling and pressing the gas a little harder. I was almost home, and in my head I could already hear the voices of the entire family. Loud Uncle Mike, sensible Aunt Linda, Mom greeting me at the door while insisting that I had lost weight again, which was never true, but it never mattered anyway. And there it was, the house, standing between snowdrifts like something out of a fairy tale. My great-grandfather built it, and it remained solid and warm to this day. The light from the windows spilled onto the snow in soft golden patches, inviting me in. I parked, stepped out of the car, and inhaled deeply. The cold air carried the faint smell of the wood stove burning inside. As soon as I opened the door, a wave of warmth hit me. Warmth mixed with smells and voices, spices, fresh pastries, roasted meat, children shouting mixed with the sound of the TV playing somewhere in the corner. The Christmas tree, decorated with the same old ornaments from my childhood, shimmered brilliantly. Garlands lit up the entire house so that even the air felt like it was sparkling. The house lived and breathed. It always had, for as long as I could remember. "Finally!" Annie shouted and threw herself at me, hugging me as if it had been 3 years instead of 3 months since we last saw each other. Mom appeared right behind her, small, thin, fluttering around like a little bird, holding a huge tray of pies with one hand. Instead of greeting me, she instantly began her usual scolding. "Sweetheart, you look so skinny. Take off your coat. Wash your hands. Sit, we're eating soon." Dad shook my hand and gave me a firm pat on the shoulder. Someone was loudly strumming a guitar in the living room. Probably Anthony. Steve sat beside him cracking seeds, a habit that had stuck with him since we were kids. His children ran between the chairs, almost knocking things over. Daisy, the mutt I had once rescued as a puppy, slept peacefully in the corner. I took off my coat, said hello to everyone, and went to play chess with Grandpa, just like always. "This time, I'll beat you for sure," I said as I sat down. Grandpa gave me a look with a spark in his eyes. "I doubt that." We began to play. He moved the pieces slowly, carefully, sometimes pausing to give me one of his small bits of advice like, "Don't forget, pawns are weapons too." After a few minutes, he said quietly, almost to himself, "This year feels different." I looked up. Grandpa wasn't looking at me. He was staring out the window into the darkness. "Of course it feels different," I answered carefully. "Grandma isn't here." He let out a small, bitter smile. There was a strange sadness in it, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. "She held all of us together," he murmured. "Prayed for every one of you. She kept the family safe. And now, who knows?" "Come on, Grandpa. We're all together. Everything's fine," I said and moved my knight. Suddenly he grabbed my wrist, sharply, stronger than I expected. "You're rushing too fast. You're still too young to understand how that can come back to you." "You're scaring me. It's just chess," I said, trying to laugh it off. He looked at me intently, as if he wanted to say something else, something important, but then only smiled crookedly and whispered, "You'll see for yourself." "Checkmate, Alex." "There you go," Grandpa Henry suddenly said and stood up from the table. I stared at the board in disbelief. He had beaten me in a few moves, although usually our games lasted far longer. "Grandpa, what were you talking about earlier?" I began, but before he could answer, Mom's voice echoed from the dining room. "Everyone, dinner's ready!" Grandpa waved his hand, dismissing whatever he had wanted to say, and walked toward the others. I stayed sitting for a few seconds, staring at the chess pieces as if they could explain his strange mood. Something in my chest tightened for a moment, a brief flash of worry. But I forced it away and went to join the family. Dinner was exactly like always, loud, warm, overflowing with food. The table was covered with salads, roasted meat, baked vegetables, pies, mashed potatoes, bowls of gravy and sauces, fresh bread, and desserts. The kettle in the center of the table filled the air with the smell of hot tea. "Well then, let's all raise a glass," Uncle Mike announced, lifting his cup for what felt like his fifth toast. The clinking of cups and silverware filled the room again. Mom immediately piled more food on my plate, insisting I needed to eat more and complaining that I looked thinner than ever, which was absolutely untrue. But she never believed me. Aunt Linda smiled softly as she poured tea from the kettle. Annie chatted with the kids and tried to stop them from stealing pastries. Dad nodded along to one of Anthony's stories. Steve cracked seeds, the same way he had since childhood. The room felt full of life, and it wrapped around me like a blanket. Daisy ran under the table and curled up near Uncle Mike. "I dropped a little piece of meat," he said, lifting his hands in mock innocence. "We're celebrating Christmas with people, not with the dog," Grandpa said in his familiar stern tone, but even he couldn't suppress a smile. Warmth filled my chest, and I tried to hold on to every moment, every face. It felt like if I looked away for even a second, something important would slip past me. I didn't know why the thought came, but it felt as if I were seeing everyone for the last time. What a ridiculous thought, I told myself, shaking my head. Dinner continued. Steve's children were finally sent to bed upstairs, leaving only the adults at the table. That was when I noticed something strange. Uncle Mike had gone outside to smoke. He walked out in just a sweater even though it was freezing. At first I didn't think much of it. He often stepped outside for a long time. But after 20 minutes, I began to glance at the door. After 30 minutes, the feeling turned into concern. "I'm going to check on him," I said, and got up. I stepped onto the porch. It was empty. The yard was quiet except for the wind. I walked around the house. No one was there. I returned to the dining room. "Where's Uncle Mike? Has anyone seen him?" I asked. Mom looked at me with genuine confusion. "Sweetheart, who are you talking about?" I felt as if someone had pulled the floor slightly out from under me. "Uncle Mike," I repeated slowly. "He was literally giving a toast just now." Annie laughed. "Oh no, here we go. Imaginary friends again?" I stared at her. Annie and the cousins had always teased me, but something about this felt wrong. Wrong in a heavy, suffocating way. Their expressions didn't match their tone. Their eyes didn't match their smiles. The room seemed to tighten around me. I tried to ignore it, sat back down and forced myself to breathe normally. Another half hour passed. Still no Uncle Mike. I turned to Aunt Linda to ask whether she had seen him, but when I looked at her seat, my words stopped. Her chair was empty. A chill slid up my spine with slow precision. "Where's Aunt Linda?" I asked, turning my head too fast. "She was right here. She was just talking." Anthony's expression darkened. "Alex, enough," he said sharply, with none of his usual humor. His voice wasn't angry. It was scared. I felt the shift before I even understood what it was. The house trembled. Not a lot. Not enough to knock anything over, but enough that every nerve in my body felt it. Then the fork on the table rolled by itself and fell to the floor with a clang. A book on the far shelf toppled and hit the carpet. A small side table near the wall scraped a few inches, as though something unseen had pushed it. And then everything fell silent. Every sound in the house vanished in a single instant. The voices, the clinking, the laughter, even the sound of the heating system. The silence was absolute. A second later, the noise returned all at once, as if someone had pressed unmute. Everyone sat where they had been. Mom, Dad, Annie, Steve, Anthony, Grandpa Henry, all in the same positions, eating, drinking, talking. No one reacted to anything. No one looked frightened. No one noticed anything strange. "You look pale," Annie said, sounding as though she were speaking from the far end of a tunnel. "You should lie down." Her voice didn't sync with her lips. For a split second it felt like her words were coming from a different place than her body. The floor shifted again, just a little, as if the entire house swayed, the way a boat does when a small wave passes underneath. It was unmistakable now. The house was moving. Annie's voice seemed distant, and I tried to focus on it, but the tension inside me grew heavier with each second. I suddenly noticed Mom rising from her chair with an empty plate in her hands, heading toward the kitchen. A sharp, instinctive fear surged through me, so unexpected and intense that I grabbed the edge of the table. "Mom, don't get up!" I almost shouted, my voice breaking. She did not react. She didn't even turn her head. It was as if she didn't hear me at all. She simply walked away, carrying the plate, her footsteps sounding softer and softer until they faded completely. Panic tightened my throat. "Mom!" I called louder, but my voice sounded muffled, like someone had wrapped cotton around my mouth. Warmth drained out of my fingers. Cold sweat covered my palms. Something was horribly wrong. I pushed back my chair and hurried into the hallway that led to the kitchen, but by the time I reached it, Mom was no longer there. The kitchen was empty. Her steps had vanished without a trace, as if she had never walked down that hall at all. I suddenly heard Daisy bark. The sound came from under the table in the dining room. She always hid there when the house got too loud. I felt a wave of relief and whispered, "At least you're still here," as I bent down to look for her. There was nothing under the table, only shadows, and the edge of the tablecloth touched the floor. "Daisy," I said quietly, and lifted the cloth. Silence. And then the same short bark, but now coming from the hallway behind me. I turned sharply, and the sound of Daisy's paws tapping on the floor led further and further away, drawing me deeper into the house. My heartbeat thumped painfully in my chest, but I followed the sound, because Daisy was real. She had to be real. She was the only thing anchoring me to sanity. I passed Grandma's former bedroom. The walls looked wrong. The space where her painting used to hang was empty, not simply bare but stripped, like something had erased it from reality. The shelves where her porcelain set and Grandpa's books used to stand were broken. Shards of dishes lay across the floor. I knelt and touched one of the fragments. The moment my fingers brushed it, the piece crumbled instantly into fine dust, scattering between my fingertips as if it had never existed. Daisy's steps led me upstairs, and I climbed, gripping the railing because the staircase felt unsteady, as if the house were breathing unevenly. I pushed open the door to the room that had once been mine, a small sanctuary filled with posters of soccer players and scale model ships I used to build. But the room no longer resembled anything from my childhood. The walls were blank and white, lit with harsh artificial light like a hospital hallway. No posters, no bed, no toys, no ship models, nothing. The room felt like a memory that had been completely wiped clean. This could not be happening. This was impossible. I forced myself back downstairs. Daisy's paws echoed from the kitchen, but when I entered, the room met me with sterile emptiness. The table was bare except for a single chair, and on its back hung Mom's apron, looking abandoned. "I told him," a quiet, almost whisper-like voice said. I froze so sharply my chest hurt. The voice was Mom's, but I could not see her anywhere. The tone wasn't angry, but filled with a deep, exhausted disappointment. Shame hit me unexpectedly, curling inside my chest like a tight knot. For a moment, I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to swallow the growing pressure in my throat and stop myself from breaking down. Then it struck me like lightning. The house was taking them, all of them, one by one. My family wasn't leaving. They were being erased. Terrified, I staggered back into the dining room. Annie stood there, her eyes wide with worry. "Alex, what's wrong with you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You look like you saw a ghost." Her words reached me slowly, as if traveling from another time. I suddenly smelled something sharp, almost chemical, like ammonia. I leaned toward the plate of apple pie in front of me and realized the smell was coming from it. My entire body recoiled. The pie looked normal, yet there was something deeply wrong in the air around it, something that made my skin crawl. Everyone else continued eating. Forks moved, glasses clinked. Conversations continued as though nothing had changed. But their movements looked slightly unnatural, like a looped recording. I felt like I was watching actors in an imitation of my family, rather than the real people I knew. Someone at the table laughed. Someone else said a toast. The voices overlapped, but none of the sounds felt alive. The entire world around me began to fade like a photograph exposed to too much light. What should I do? How do I stop this? My thoughts raced painfully fast. A throbbing ache formed behind my temples. I pressed my fingers to my head and closed my eyes for only a second. When I opened them, the room had changed again. Only two people remained at the table. Annie and Grandma, my dead grandmother, sitting right across from me, I shot up from the chair so fast I nearly tipped over. My hands clutched the back of another chair just to stay upright. "Grandma," I whispered, unable to form anything else. She sat there exactly as I remembered her. Her tired, gentle hands folded on the table. Her warm, understanding gaze fixed on me. The look in her eyes was the same one she always used when I came home sad as a kid, and she told me everything would be all right. I reached out and touched her hand. It was warm, soft, real. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked softly. "Cross yourself. Everything will pass." Her voice was so calm that I automatically obeyed and made the sign of the cross. "Annie, do you see her?" I asked hoarsely. "Do you see Grandma sitting here?" I turned to Annie. She sat alone at a completely empty table. There were no plates, no salads, no pastries, no kettle. Only a clean white tablecloth stretched across the wooden surface. Annie's expression was tight. Her eyes glistened as if she was fighting tears. She stared directly at me without blinking. "Don't you dare leave me," she said in a voice that wavered but did not break. "How am I supposed to be here alone? You're my brother. You've always been with me." Her voice cracked, although she quickly tried to regain control. "You promised, remember? You promised you would always stay close." I reached toward her, trying to say something, anything that would calm her, but the moment I extended my hand, the room jerked sharply. A loud crack echoed from above. The ceiling split. Pieces of plaster fell in slow motion. I raised my head. The walls were tearing apart. Wallpaper peeled off in long strips. Deep cracks crawled across the ceiling like black veins. Annie's voice came from somewhere far behind me. But when I spun around, the room was empty. Everyone was gone. I was alone. The dining table began to crack like ice under pressure. From the living room, I heard laughter, faint, fading, the voices of Uncle Mike, Daisy, Aunt Linda, the kids, all dissolving, like an old radio losing its signal. The house kept breaking apart. A wardrobe collapsed in the corner, as if an invisible fist had slammed into it. The floorboards buckled under my feet. The walls grew colder, turning smooth and slick like ice. The cracking grew louder. The room thinned out, as if the air itself was being stretched. The edges of reality began to curl and crumble into the same fine dust that the porcelain had turned into. If I didn't get out, I understood clearly. The house would erase me next. I stumbled backward, then again, until I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing across what no longer felt like solid ground. The house kept tearing itself apart behind me. I ran through the hallway, but the floor beneath me no longer felt stable. The boards bent under my weight, cracking and turning into dust the moment my feet left them. The chandelier above me creaked violently, then snapped from its chain and crashed onto the floor, scattering glass shards that flashed like ice. I shielded my face with my arm and pushed forward, stumbling as the walls on both sides split open. Pictures that had hung there for decades faded out like old film until only empty nail holes remained. Cabinets along the wall cracked from top to bottom and fell apart into fragments that dissolved before they hit the ground. I reached the front door, or rather where the door should have been, but instead of the familiar wooden frame, I saw a smooth, solid wall, as if no door had ever existed there in the first place. "No, no, no," I whispered, my breath catching painfully in my chest. I rushed to the nearest window, but when I leaned toward it, I saw only an empty frame. The glass was gone, the outside world replaced by a grey, shifting void that seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing. A groaning sound came from deep inside the house, something like a giant beam twisting under unbearable pressure. The floor under my feet cracked again, boards lifting and breaking. The entire structure felt like it was collapsing, not physically, but as if reality itself was folding inward. I remembered the small window on the staircase landing, a single, stubborn piece of the house that had remained unchanged earlier. It was my only chance. I ran up the stairs 2 at a time. The railing wobbled under my grip, cold and slick like metal left in snow. When I reached the window, it flickered for a moment, the edges blurred like static on a dying television. But it still existed. It was still there. I didn't stop to think. I dove toward it. The moment I pushed through the frame, an explosion of blinding white light engulfed everything around me. Not just bright, consuming. It swallowed all shapes, all sounds, all sense of direction. It felt like falling through electricity. I raised an arm to shield my eyes, my lungs burning as I fought for breath, and then, through the whiteness, voices emerged. "I told him not to drive so fast. It's the holidays. What was he rushing for?" A low, rough voice said somewhere nearby. "Thank God he's alive." Another voice answered, softer, almost trembling. I blinked. My eyelids felt heavy and sticky, like they weighed several pounds. My fingers refused to respond. My arms felt like stone. I tried to move, but my body was completely drained. "Do you think he can hear us?" a girl's voice asked, thin, frightened. "Of course he can hear you," someone replied, much older. "He just can't speak yet." I struggled to open my eyes fully. Shapes came first. Blurred silhouettes. 2 men stood on one side of the bed. They looked almost identical, one clicking sunflower seeds nervously, the other pressing his lips together, silent. Near him stood a girl, whose hands shook visibly. A man with a thick beard stood beside her. An elderly man with knotted hands and a weathered face. A woman, small, thin, bird-like, was holding my hand with both of hers. Their faces felt familiar, yet unfamiliar at the same time, like a memory coming through thick fog. "Doctor said he'll make it," the bearded man said. "Honestly, it's a miracle." "A miracle," the woman with curls echoed. She looked like she was on the verge of crying. I tried to speak, but all I could manage was a strained exhale. "He's waking up," someone said quickly. "Give him space," another voice replied. A door opened quietly behind them, and calm footsteps approached. A man in a white coat stepped into my blurred field of vision. "The surgery was successful," he said in an even-toned, professional voice. "His condition is stable now. That's the most important part." "Can he hear us?" the girl's trembling voice asked. "It's hard to say right now," the doctor answered. He came closer and looked at the monitors. "Head trauma is always unpredictable. There may be amnesia and other impairments. Some memory gaps can be temporary, and some may be permanent. The human brain is a complicated thing. Sometimes a person remembers everything in a week. Sometimes it goes differently." Silence filled the room. "He will recover, won't he?" the thin woman who held my hand asked quietly. I felt her fingers squeeze mine a little tighter. "Give him time," the doctor said. "Anything is possible. Right now the main thing is that he is alive. That alone is a miracle." The silence was broken by a loud sob. It was Annie. Her voice shook as if she were speaking to someone who was far, far away. "He will make it," she said. "He promised me he wouldn't leave. He promised." If you enjoyed the story, You can support the channel by liking and subscribing. See you next time.